and welcome to On Deadline. I'm Dennis Owens.
I'm Amanda St. Hilaire. Kendra Nichols is on assignment. Thanks for joining us.
If you're listening for the first time, we are journalists for ABC 27 News in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But on this podcast, we talk about issues that affect people all over.
So these are the conversations you don't hear on the news. We're going more in depth and behind the scenes, getting very personal, very real, and hopefully getting you thinking.
We're recording on September 19, 2017, and today we are talking about pensions. Now, before your eyes glaze over and you reach for the pause button, stop. Don't do it. Pensions, or more accurately, pension debt in Pennsylvania, is a major factor in your life, whether you know it or not, and whether you're in line to get one or not, because a lot of money is going into paying down the debt on those pensions, and that is money that isn't going to other programs. It could be funding a myriad of things across the state, but is not. Yes, the legislature passed a quote-unquote pension reform bill, and the governor signed it into law. That will change the rules and ease the burden for people not yet hired and taxpayers not yet working. So yes, the future problem has been dealt with in part, but the current problem with pensions has not. And that's what we're here to talk about today. We have two outstanding guests to talk about it. Barry Shutt is a retiree from the Harrisburg suburbs. Good morning to you, Barry.
Good morning, Dennis.
Thank you for being with us. Eric Epstein with Rock the Capitol and a Harrisburg raconteur has done extensive work on how we got here. Good morning to you, Eric, and thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
So where is here? So we recently passed a 3-year anniversary. 3 years since retiree Barry Shutt decided to go down to the state capitol and raise a red flag with lawmakers about this problem of pensions that we have. You pick up the story from there.
Well, I started at Dennis for 3 reasons. My 3 grandchildren, realizing that pension debt, if we didn't start addressing it, was going to fall to them. They were going to have the burden of a debt caused by this generation of Pennsylvanians. And I was trying to get the legislature to say, we caused the problem. We should deal with the problem now.
And the pension problem 3 years ago, give me the dollar value. What was it?
It was $57 billion, $57 billion.
In unfunded liability.
In unfunded liability.
What is it today?
$76.8 billion.
So nearly $20 billion more in 3 years.
And to get everyone's attention, you decided to
have a cake, because essentially
well, you had a cake to celebrate the 3-year anniversary, but prior to that, there was cakes and clocks and tell us.
Well, I started with this sign. I started up at the governor's office or the governor's mansion, trying to get people's attention of the problem. And I went down to the Capitol steps, sat there for a couple days, and met a couple reps, including our current Speaker of the House. And then I saw the governor 2 days after his inauguration in the rotunda. And I stopped him, and I said, Governor, please don't let them borrow money to pay the debt. At that time, that's the only thing they were talking about, borrowing money to pay the debt. It's like getting a new credit card to pay the one that you hadn't been paying off on for years. And I said, that's not the way it should be done. This generation created a problem. This generation needs to start paying it.
And in 3 years, how much have they fixed the problem?
None.
And why should the average person listening to this care? Again, as I said, I tried to get everybody to not change the channel or whatever it is the equivalent is on a podcast.
Well, because it's a complicated issue, right. And so people, I think, tend to tune out. They hear
and
a bunch
I'm coming
of
to
numbers.
you in just a second, Eric. But Barry, why should the average person, like you're an average retiree, you get a pension, by the way.
I get a pension.
But why should the average person care?
Because in 15 years, when the pension funds go belly up, then the number one priority in the state budget every year will become paying retirees' pensions. That means that the budget will require 40 to 45% direct payments from taxpayers to retirees.
That's a very unsatisfying payment. That's it. So you're paying for the work that somebody did for you years ago, and a big chunk of the budget is going to that. Going to go to that.
And when we talk state pensions, can we get a grasp on exactly what we're talking about? So in terms of state police, in terms of all the employees getting it, do we know how many people are getting paid right now?
Well, let me back up. I'm gonna get political here and address Barry's question first, and then your question second.
Sounds good.
Because I think what you asked is why should people be concerned?
Yeah.
Is essentially, in my mind, the key issue. You should be concerned because most everybody in Pennsylvania pays property taxes. If you look at over the course of the last 3 years, we've had about 170 school districts go over their cap. That's about the limit you're allowed to raise in terms of property taxes. That's 170 school districts out of 500. Then that number increased again. And then this year it increased again. So no matter where you're at and whether you like it or not, you're actually paying for this problem. Actually, you're paying rent on the problem because we're not addressing the problem. So here is the problem, is not only are you paying more money in property taxes not to solve the problem, but that's money that's not going in to the classroom. So for every dollar we spend when we raise property taxes, only pennies go into the classroom.
And you're also on the Central Office School Board, so you get a real sense of how this hits
We're
the
the
local
12th
school
largest
district.
school board. Essentially 70% of our income is non-discretionary. It's wages and benefits, and people need to understand that based on the scenario that was created by the legislature, and the school boards also have to fess up and take part on this, is that they started giving themselves holidays, payment holidays.
So let's go do a little history. How did we get here?
All right, we got here. This is a 5-step tragedy. The first thing that occurred in 2001 was Act 9, where a deal was cut. Governor Corbett at the time, a Republican, and both houses.
In 01, that's Ridge.
Governor Ridge. I'm
Wrong
sorry.
Tom.
Oh, my God. I apologize to both governors, but I'll smack them appropriate later. At the time, it was Governor Ridge, and you had Speaker of the House, Matt Ryan, and then you had the Senate controlled by Republicans. So essentially all three vessels of the legislature, the Senate and the House and the governor, basically collaborated to pass legislation that was unsustainable. And what they did is they increased their pension payments by 50%.
50-50?
Yeah, 50%, 50.
Improved it by 50%.
Yeah. So we spiked it 50%, and then we spiked it for judges 50%, and we did it retroactively. So there was a grab back. Clearly people have paid what they should pay, and it kind of goes to your question. State employees have paid what they were supposed to pay, and teachers, but they never paid for the grab back. There was never a commensurate contribution. So in 2001, Act 9, and Governor Ridge, just to get it right, basically cut a deal. And the deal was this: we're going to increase our pensions. And what happened, and a lot of people don't talk about this, and Barry and I have raised this issue, we had a record number of retirements that year. This was a planned train wreck. This wasn't an accident. We actually almost had the same number of retirements in that year as we did when the pay raise went through.
Well, let's just say, to give proper context,
Legislative retirement.
Right. Yep. Okay, but let's just, for context, the economy was going gangbusters. The fund was over what it needed to be, right? It was beyond 100%. I believe
Life
it was 120%. Life was good. In other words, this decision wasn't made prior to the perfect storm of economic downturn that hit.
Yeah, but look, everybody knows that there's a recession once every 7 years. Any financial planner will tell you there's peaks and valleys. To assume that we were going to have that kind of sustained economic growth during a dot-com boom was asinine.
I'm not arguing for the intelligence of it, but I am just giving you the perspective of the funds were flush with cash.
But I would add something to that, Dennis, and what I would add is that when it was passed, it was prior to 9/11. And when it was effective, it was after 9/11. So the legislature and the governor had time to say, you know what, we can't afford this because 9/11 happened, everything took a hit, and a big hit at that time, and we could have reevaluated and restructured that thing to say, wait a second, let's put the brakes on that. But they didn't do it. They continued on that road.
Because who's going to cut their own pensions? Lawmakers who are getting the pensions are the ones
responsible legislators would, but they're not responsible.
Yeah, but let's answer that question. Look at the genesis of this legislation. If you look at it, it started out in 2000 as it snaked through the House and snaked through the Senate. It had unbelievable bipartisan support. Just about everybody in the House supported this legislation. You only had 9 no votes in the Senate. On top of that,
but to be clear, they're voting to enhance their own pensions.
They're voting not only to enhance their own budget, but even the people that voted no took the pension increase. So you have by May, essentially the bill is bottled, it's pickled, and it's ready to go. And then you had 9/11, as Barry correctly pointed out. So they had an opportunity for corrective action. They didn't do it. They made it worse through Act 38, Act 40, where they put caps and collars on contributions.
So now that's where. So basically, what you're saying is, if you're supposed to pay $100, they were only paying $50. They weren't even paying what they were supposed to pay.
Right. They solved the problem by kicking the can down the road, as Barry's famous is saying. And by doing that, the problem continued. I don't want to say it grew exponentially, but it grew at an alarming rate.
And I just want to point out, and I'm sorry I did, but I think it's always important to point out when we're talking pensions, that the state workers and the school teachers put in what they were supposed to do.
Absolutely.
It was the school
Right.
districts and the governments that took a holiday on paying.
Yeah,
right?
but I would point out one important. Let me just point this out: is that a lot of people. This was retroactive, so people got a pension increase retroactively,
for which they didn't pay.
Right.
For which they didn't pay and their employers didn't pay.
Right. So that was a gift.
But who's going to say no to that? I think Dennis's point is it's
Right.
not like the individual teacher's fault. It's not the individual state employees that I think sometimes they do get blamed.
Well, they do get blamed, but
And they weren't in the position to vote on anything.
No,
by the way.
but
They didn't vote it.
But did they cut a deal?
I point out to my colleagues, my fellow retirees or whatever, that we had to sign a paper, and I confess I signed that paper not thinking what the heck they're going to pay for it, no problem. But you had the choice. You sign this paper, you pay more out of your each pay, and then you're going to get more. In this case, ours went from a factor of 2 to 2.5.
Right.
If they'd have said it's going to be a retroactive factor based on your years of service, every one of us would have signed that paper because 2.1 was better than 2.0. And the more years you work past the implementation date, the higher your percentage is going to be. If you were hired after 2002, you already got the 2.5. So we would have signed that. And that would have been my factor. I think would have been 2.1.
Well, and a little later, I want to get into the whole concept of we're allowed for some reason. By the way, in the private sector, when the recession hit, we lost the company stopped matching the next paycheck of the 401k, right? So private sector is allowed to do that, but for some reason, when it comes to government, we can enhance your benefit, but at no point can we disenhance your benefit. I don't know if that's a word.
And I am going to bring age into this because we talk about, millennials a lot on this podcast, Dennis. And it's frustrating for people in my age group to be told, you're the ones who want something for nothing. And you look at this state pension situation, and it was like, well, wait a minute. You guys are the ones who signed off on this whole thing, and now you're telling us, well, wait, we don't want you to have it. But now that we've reaped the benefits, now things are going to be changed. Yet my generation's the one that wants something for nothing.
Now that I'm 55, I think the driving age should be 54.
But there's a couple of things we need.
And we're the ones paying for it.
Right. Well, let's just factor a couple of things. When you go back to when this actually occurred, it was a deal. PSEA knew what they were doing. This was a deal that was cut, and the deal that was cut was basically to soften the blow of charter schools, which actually was ineffective. So people went into this eyes wide open, knowing that their assumptions were going to be faulty. You weren't going to have this kind of sustained growth. Nobody put a gun to the head of the funds and said, invest in Delphi, invest in Enron. They made bad investments. So there's a lot of contributing factors. The millennials, Generation X, absolutely have a grievance. Absolutely have a grievance because this is an intergenerational theft. They're not going to look. The term we used to use was used and useful. That if you're going to basically be taxed, if we're going to assess you, then you're going to get something of use from it. But people who haven't been born yet are going to wind up paying this debt. Absolutely. And that is going to be a problem because I think at the end of the day, and I'm very cynical, that's how this problem gets solved. When young people are faced with the fact that the amount of money left in the budget to pay for a necessary program is shrinking because we're paying
people who worked 10 years ago.
10, 20, 30 years ago. And remember,
but they're voting with their feet, too. That's a problem. Young people are leaving the state of Pennsylvania. And
the funny thing you say that because I had 2 college kids stand by the clock looking at that number, click away, and I said, what are you going to do when you graduate? They said, leave Pennsylvania.
And when you say the clock, you're talking about the pension clock that you had there at the Capitol.
Yes.
Kind of like at Wall Street that shows the debt clock. It's that idea, right?
Yes.
You have an intersection here where we're attracting older people because we don't tax retirement income. We're booting out younger people because they don't want to actually, come out of college, get a job, and then essentially have to pay a large part of their salary paying off somebody else's debt.
Well, and that takes us into a third rail of politics, which I say all the time, that this state bends over backwards for senior citizens, and nobody's going to bring that up because senior citizens vote. But we do
And
not
here,
tax
lots of
retirement
senior
income.
citizens
Our
vote.
lottery proceeds go to benefit seniors. You know, in many southern states, they steer that lottery proceeds towards making sure kids to defray the cost
Right.
of college, because they figure, let's spend that money to get kids through college, who then will pay taxes for the next 20-some years or 30-some years of their working
Right.
life,
Well, we
as
talk
opposed to
about-
steering it to seniors who are no longer buying stuff or paying
We
taxes.
talk about
and I would
Pennsylvania
point
having a
something
brain
out.
drain.
Yeah.
That's
right.
why.
And I would point something out, and Eric and I shared this with Eric, but you could be a senior in retirement income, Social Security, and make $100,000 a year, have $13,000 worth of interest income. Now imagine what the principal is if you're making $13,000 interest, and not pay a penny of PIT in Pennsylvania. But if you're
PIT meaning
personal income tax. But if you're making $35,000 a year, and you have 2 kids, you're trying to raise a family, you're going to pay $1,075 in personal income tax in Pennsylvania. That is an immoral system. We don't count retirement income and Social Security in the calculation of eligibility for tax forgiveness. Now, when I go to the grocery store, they don't ask me, is this retirement income or is this earned income?
But you
I
keep
pay the
talking like
same
that,
price.
you go to the grocery store, your fellow seniors are going to give you the hairy.
I know. They'll run me over with a cart. My point is, we can raise the threshold for tax forgiveness, and we could tax retirement income. I've told Dave Reed this, tax my retirement. We give $3 billion away every year by not taxing retirement income in Pennsylvania. Now, I don't want to tax low-income
right.
retirees.
Yeah, so you put a
So
ceiling or floor on it.
You raise the forgiveness level of the PIT.
So you don't pay it on the first
So you
20
don't-
grand or 25
exactly.
grand, something like that.
Exactly.
So I guess my next question is, because Dennis, last night we were at the PA Chamber dinner event where Governor Wolf spoke, and he touted historic pension reform.
Oh, no.
So what?
right.
This quote pension reform give me pension reform for dummies.
let me
This
just
reform
say,
that
as soon as that dinner
happened.
was over, 4 different people said to me, they're talking about pension reform. We didn't do anything for pensions. We
Right.
did it for the future, and that needed to be done.
So for the people whose eyes might be glazing over, what is it, and is that going to have any impact? Is it actual reform?
It's supposed to save $1.3 billion over 30 years. Now, whenever the legislature gives you a proposed savings or what the estimate is, you know it's high. So I don't think it's going to be that much. But 1.3 over 30 years. The debt's going up $172 a second. That's $14.8 million every day, or $5 to $6 billion a year. So by the time that new reform takes place, January 1
of 19. So just so you know, it's for people who aren't hired yet until 2019.
Right, and I know they're gonna have 3
and it's going to be a
different
hybrid
options.
kind of a thing. So there's going to be some defined contribution, some defined benefit.
After Barry's done, let's talk about the hybrid failure in
and by
Michigan.
the time it goes into effect, that clock's going to read about $85 billion.
So we're still digging the hole, just
We're
maybe
digging
not
the
as
hole.
fast.
They didn't do a thing for that.
No.
I had legislators come down to me after they passed it and say, "Oh, you can leave now. We took care of that." And it was all tongue in cheek because they knew they didn't put 1 penny on that debt.
And you're still there.
Well, but here's the thing. It's a cruel joke. It's a political Monty game. What they did is essentially give themselves political talking points. At the end of the day, not only will the unfunded asset liability continue to grow, we don't know if the hybrid system will work. If you look to the state of Michigan, it's been a disaster. When you look at the implementation, when you look at the cost, and then when you look at assumptions, and everything is predicated on assumptions.
So explain the hybrid system. How does that work? I know there are a bunch of different options.
I don't know that we have enough time. Maybe that should be another segment.
Well, in layman's terms, the first 50 grand or so that you make would be the traditional defined benefit. After that, it's defined contribution, so that we're not getting into these huge pensions in theory that we're giving, 6-figure pensions that we're giving out. Then so it minimizes the risk to the taxpayer from what the current system is.
But we don't put everyone in it. We exclude
state police,
state correctional people, Capitol Police,
anyone hazard jobs, right?
Yeah, everyone who carries a gun. And the problem with that is, as soon as you commit somebody to that defined benefit plan, and the plan does not earn 7.25%, you're increasing the debt.
Right.
Now, I preferred, and I told the governor that you needed a clean system where you go, everyone's in the system. You make it fair, you make it reasonable, maybe a 5% employer match for retirement. And if an employee only puts in 1%, the state matches 1%. But if the employee wants to put in 7 or 8%, whatever the federal limit might be, the state's still only going to commit to 5%, and that's yours.
And however the markets do for you,
However the
that's what it
markets do,
is.
That's what you guys live with.
That's correct.
But it's beyond whatever the markets do. Barry has raised a good point. It's that we shouldn't have a system where there's pawns and paupers and princes and kings. We should have a system that everybody's assessed the same way. No exceptions, no exemptions. Not somebody gets a 25% increase, a 50% increase.
Right.
Nobody gets a bonus after 69. Look, one of the things that we have to look at is that most people, and this goes to your initial question to me, and we have thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the PSERS and SERS system. Most of those folks haven't had a COLA in over 12 years. Most of those folks have a modest pension.
Average is like 26
It's about 23 grand, 23 to 26. So
but that's going to balloon as more people retire now.
But the point I'm making, and Barry has made this over and over again, is when we have this conception when we say fixed income, we mean poor. It doesn't necessarily mean poor. What it means is that you have basically a fixed income, and you can be wealthy and have a fixed income. But we also we've done an awful job. But what about the people in the middle, in their 30s and 40s that are paying a mortgage, that are paying property taxes, and are paying the full brunt of everything? They're not getting a break. And those are the people we want to attract in Pennsylvania. Those are the people we want to keep. So this system is not just about, in my mind, pensions. It's about equity. It's about our future. And right now, I don't think we have much of a future. There's no way that we're going to address the unfunded asset liability through that legislation. They're too separate and apart. They should have been tied together. It should not have been decoupled. If we were going to get real pension reform that dealt with the unfunded asset liability, we would have passed both at the same time. This is great for Tom Wolf because he can tout pension reform and run for governor.
And all the legislators do the same thing. We did that last year. We don't need to talk
so
about
how
pensions.
damaging is it that how damaging is it now? And you know how things politically work, that they can now say we quote unquote did pension reform, and as you said, the governor said it last night, when it's not really pension reform, but now it's kind of goes off the table, doesn't it?
It goes off the table, and I have legislators walk by the clock all the time and say, all right, now you did that pension reform. It wasn't what I prefer. It's a step in the right direction. What are you going to do about the debt? Well, we need to pay that. I said, well, how are you going to do that? Well, we need to cut spending. You've had 15 years since Act 9 in 2001, to cut spending elsewhere to pay the bill you created with Act 9. Well, they didn't cut spending.
Well, they're not going to cut spending. Barry and I worked.
They won't do that.
No, last year, Barry. Well, Brockton Capital put together a budget menu. We found $2 billion in budget cuts. We challenged Republicans. You kept saying that we could get here by cutting, and so we said we challenge you. Cut this. Do we really need $500,000 to research a superconductor every year? Do we really have to spend money, nominating an official unicorn for Pennsylvania? Whatever it is. I mean, you have to look at the reality.
It's a handsome unicorn. It's a handsome unicorn.
But the point is, when you point out to people, and Barry has pointed this out.
By the way, that might be the official mascot of pension reform, the unicorn, because neither one of them exists.
Does it come with a rainbow?
Right.
Good point.
But the unicorn is also the golf caddy for Hillary Clinton. But at any rate, what I think we need to look at and be frank about it is that you need to commit to a specific cut. And I don't think we're going to get there by cuts alone. And you are absolutely right, and I think both of you noted it, is that from a legal perspective, you cannot readjust the pensions downwards. There's 3 black letter cases the Supreme Court passed. And by the way, the judges got a 50% increase. They have no incentive to get involved in this process either.
And one thing, can I just point out, because I always want to point it out because I don't think enough people realize it, the middle of the night pay raise that the legislature took and then gave back? Judges never gave it back. And while there's 253 legislators, there's 1,000 judges.
So basically all the decision makers, anyone who could do something that makes a lick of difference, have massive conflicts of interest.
If I was an attorney, I would challenge the retro benefit. If you stop the retro benefits on myself, roll me back from 2.5 to what would probably be 2.1, I'll be fine.
You're asking them to take money away from you.
But what I'm saying is, yes. I mean, and I told Dave Reed the same thing. I said, we always talk about cutting it, rolling it back, and we take the whole thing. Well, the whole thing's not going to make it. You're not going to reduce pensions that people paid for. But they didn't pay for the retro benefits. No
So
one
that might
paid
be
for
kind
them.
of the loophole
Therefore,
you're
they
thinking.
weren't earned. If you
And-
if you separate that and challenge that alone and say, look, they weren't paid for, they weren't earned. We're not going to make people pay it back what they got so far, but from this point on, you go to a
But
retro
once
factor.
people have something, it's hard to
Well,
take
we're going
away.
to talk. That's going to be
Oh,
another episode.
absolutely.
You know, if you look at DACA and Obamacare, those are two of the big problems. That once somebody gets a benefit, you can't bring it back.
Well,
but let me ask you this, because you just said something very interesting. I don't know. Yes, there's been legal challenges to the whole thing
Right.
of moving the pension. But if we say every dollar you make starting in 2020, moving forward, you're going into a 401k system. Now, we have wonderful computers that can figure out how to use your pension.
Dennis doesn't know how to use them.
I
but we
don't.
have
That's
wonderful
correct.
Computers.
But people do. Thank God. People like
That's why
Amanda do.
Dennis has kids so they can work.
Well, that's exactly right, and they do better than I do. But my point is, I don't think the concept of the dollars you make in 2020. Here's the deal: 2020, you're going to move to a defined contribution. Those future dollars, nobody's holding a gun to your head to keep the job. Stay workers, teachers. Here's what we're doing, and I don't know that has been challenged in the courts.
Yeah, I think what also hasn't been challenged is the mindset. There was a time when state workers were underpaid vis-a-vis the private sector. Now you have a situation where their salaries are commensurate and their benefits exceed
Or
those
better.
of the private sector. You also have a recession-proof job, which most people don't have in the private sector. We missed an opportunity. As I'm fond of saying, Pennsylvania never misses an opportunity to miss an opportunity. We should have gone right now and had a clean break. We should have done it now. We're not going to address this again. I guarantee you that we put this discussion on hold, not only until after this election, but for some time. And where I'm at is I don't want to talk about who's responsible, who's culpable. You know, I think we're past the blame game. We're now at the point where we need solutions. And that's why, yes, sometimes the teachers do get too much of the blame, but at the same time, they haven't participated in coming or formulating a solution. So you got to come to the table. You have to have more than an appetite. It has to be the teachers. It has to be the taxpayers. It has to be everybody at the table. And this is something that we've advocated for. Let's have a discussion. Let's sit down and talk about how we're going to solve the problem, because all we do is basically apportion blame.
How does Pennsylvania compare to other states?
Crap.
And
Poor.
and I guess what I'm getting at though is it something culturally that we have going on that's gotten us here and that's preventing
Who's
us
worse,
from
New
moving
Jersey is
forward?
about the only state
Or is it
worse?
politics as usual and that's
It's
just what we should
politics
expect?
as usual, and look how many people we've thrown in jail in Pennsylvania. I mean, it's sad. It really is disheartening to talk to so many legislators who don't have a plan to deal with the debt. They don't care. It's kick the can down the road till I'm out of here and collecting my pension, and let someone else worry about a solution.
So we're fairly confident the politicians in Harrisburg are not going to fix it, or can't fix it.
Well, here's the deal: is we're in the bottom three, and we trade places with Illinois, New Jersey for the worst credit rating. Illinois is on the verge of being junk bond rating. I don't know if their latest budget scenario will take them out of it. The only reason right now that we're going to have a budget, and Governor Wolf said it himself, we're about to be downgraded again. You know, Barry and I aren't making this up. We get downgraded every year. And so what that means is, and again, you asked initially, how does this affect everybody in Pennsylvania? The cost for us to borrow money keeps getting more expensive, which gets passed on to the taxpayer. So you may not think
It's
you're
your
impacted,
money.
So
but there's a double barrel here. You're
Right.
paying higher property taxes, higher interest fees.
But public pensions are in trouble all over the country,
Right.
whether it be municipal or state. And I told you about the South Carolina Treasury Department. I said, you in trouble too? They said, absolutely. We're getting there.
So what do you say to people who say, okay, Barry, so give me the latest number on what's the unfunded liability?
76.8 billion.
Okay, so 76 billion. Okay. But everybody's not retired. So the argument goes by many in the under the dome, and you and I have met them, that say, you're over dramatizing it, because not everybody, and this is true, not everybody's retiring tomorrow that you need the 76 billion, like your mortgage. You may not be able to pay off your full mortgage right now, but you can make your monthly payment. And so what's the big drama? Just keep paying what we're doing and we'll get out of this
Because if
thing.
you're not paying what you need to stay even with everything and pay down the debt, which you're already behind on, the interest is growing constantly. Now, you're right. If everyone retired today, you'd need that $76.8 billion tomorrow. But that's not happening. But that $76.8 billion is a real number that's going to be obligated on future taxpayers to pay, and it keeps growing at $172 a second right now. Now, it will be adjusted downward a little bit probably in November when the PCERS report comes out and we recalculate it. In May, I dropped it $700 million, but that doesn't mean the interest isn't growing. You know, and one of the funniest things that I run into, and one of the staffers on the Democratic side said, "Oh, your number's too high." Well, okay, let's say it's $60 billion instead of 76.
Yeah,
we ought to be able to fix that next Tuesday then, if it's only 60.
But if you look at, well, let me just for a second, because I think what we're forgetting. There's a lot of municipalities that are danger. Philly, Pittsburgh, yeah. So remember,
Scranton.
We have 500 school districts, 67 counties. You know, so what we're talking about, I just want your listeners to understand, is the state.
Right.
You know, but this is the pension is a plague that's afflicting all taxing authorities and all taxpayers.
I guess what I want to know is what the response is to the argument, oh, well, we need to have good benefits to attract the best employees. We hear that every time we do a pension story. I know people seek out state jobs specifically because they know it has a good pension. It's almost become a more lucrative job, which you wouldn't think of as belonging to state government. But what do you say in response to people who say that?
Look at our legislature. Look what they get paid. Look at their benefits. Did that generate good legislators? I mean, we got a $76 billion debt. I mean, give me a break. Well, these people.
But she's talking about it's school districts or state workers.
I understand, and I just think
the private sector manages it somehow.
Here's the reality: the private sector does not use defined benefits. Almost 90%, or basically they're in defined contributions. That's the reality. The largest employer in the country, no matter what state you go to, is the federal government, the state government, and the local government. That's reality. Okay, so it's a very competitive marketplace. Unemployment is essentially even. We're at 4%. So the reality is that yes, everybody would like, and I agree. You'd like to have health care, you like to have pension, you like to have everything. But you know what? In the real world, that's not how it works. And I guess what we're saying is we should only pay what we can afford. And frankly, we've gotten to the point where, and let's be honest, look at the salaries of some of the people in state government. And it's not just your legislators.
Yeah, that 100,000 club keeps going
absolutely.
Up and up
and that's why I use the analogy of 100,000 and say, okay, so that person's not going to pay a cent in state income tax when they retire, but the young couple making $35,000 a year is going to pay $1,075. Now, that's not fair to the young people who are trying to get their life started and raise a family.
So 10, 20, 30 years from now, if this situation doesn't get addressed, if people kind of continue to have that mentality, hey, we fixed it, no problem, what does Pennsylvania look like for that young couple? Asking for a friend.
Well, but what'll happen is this, and I think one of the core issues is that public service doesn't equate to private enrichment. And or personal entitlement. We're not in the Kennedy era anymore, but we can't assume that the government is going to give you this gorgeous benefit package. What does it mean for us is down the road, and this is the reality, as the pension unfunded asset liability number grows, the amount of money that we'll have available to fund education, to fund Department of Public Welfare will decrease. So the amount of services provided by the county will decrease. I mean, that's a reality. That's what's going to happen. So the services we provide will go away, and we're going to pay. And I think you're going to have, and I've said this before, intergenerational warfare. I think younger people are going to say, wait a minute, so you're taking away A, B, and C because I'm paying somebody's pension. And I think what you're going to see is pushback and some draconian cuts. What are you going to do if you're a younger person and 10, 20, 30% of your budget goes to servicing a pension debt and you can't keep your constituents happy?
Dennis and I will disagree on this, perhaps. I've advocated an increase in the PIT or the sales tax, preferably, PIT if you tax my pension. If you roll me back to a prorated factor, I'll be fine. If you tax my pension, I'll be fine. And most retirees in Pennsylvania will be. I would couple with that, as I said earlier, was raise the tax forgiveness. We need to take care of what I call the widows and the orphans, the low-income retirees, just like school districts need to take care of the low-income property tax owner or property owners, so that they don't get an increase every year. We can freeze that. There's an act in place to do that. It's called Act 50. We could do that. But it is extremely difficult for me to talk to my friends, and they're golfing today, and I'm not with them.
Not that you're bitter about that.
Have those guys complain about they don't want to pay any. No one wants to pay more in taxes. But we're talking about our kids and our grandkids, and now I'm at a point where I'm starting to think of my great-grandkids to say they're going to have to bear the burden of that if we don't just give a little. 0.5% raises $2.1 billion. $2 billion on the pension debt for 15 to 20 years, gets it under control and starts, pays it down. And let's see where we're at. I suggested.
I don't disagree with anything you just said. Now,
make it a sunsetted legislation. We're going to do it, and I lowered my number. Let's do it sunsetted in 15 years. We raise it 0.5%. It goes away in 15 years. Unless the legislature at that time votes to extend it, okay? But it's got to be dedicated to that purpose and that purpose alone.
What's wrong? The thought I had was tax pensions and put the money in a pot to pay pensions.
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just politically, not feasible.
And seniors vote, of course.
Well, look, let's be honest.
$3 billion a year we're giving away by not taxing retirement.
Here's your decision if you're a Pennsylvania taxpayer. You can either service the gerontocracy, which we are, or you can continue to service the plutocracy, organized theft. At some point, we need a break. We need to, the paradigm needs to shift. We don't have the people in place to make those bold decisions. It's just clear cut that you don't have the people who can make. What it means is not getting reelected. To look at the solutions we need to solve the problem, basically assures you won't get reelected.
I think if you put the picture that Barry just painted, that is a retiree making $75,000 and $80,000 in pension income and not paying taxes, and a young couple with 2 kids making $40,000 a year and paying taxes, it's clear that that's not a fair situation.
Well, but let's also speak to an issue that it kind of bothers me, is this misnomer we have that because we were talking about it, we're assuming everybody's going to retire at the same time. We also assume that when people die, that their pension goes away. That's not the case. It's bequeathable. So in other words, you can give your pension benefits to a spouse. So half of it. So I don't know if people remember, it was just about 10 years ago when the last Civil War widow died. To put some perspective on it, so it's better to deal with this issue up front than delay.
And again, raising the threshold to me is key. You got to raise the threshold for tax forgiveness so you don't hit the low-income people. But as I would say to my golfing friends, you golf 3 times a week and you tell me you can't pay a little more in taxes.
But see, whenever my generation brings that up, we're asking for a handout. We're the selfish ones asking for a handout.
Yeah,
I think you have a very good point.
The argument is, okay, so I can't afford to pay more in taxes. I just put money down on a cruise. Give me a break. Or I can't pay more in taxes. I just spent $1,500 on a new set of golf clubs. That's the kind of arguments that we old folks are making that make us look selfish.
But wait a minute. We can talk about it around this table and come up with all the solutions. But the reality is, I don't know that there's anything that can really bring so many people to the table to give up so much self-interest.
Well, I think it's the way you present the message, and I think you're going to have a psychic break. Time will cure this problem, and that's what I told people that in my generation. We just, as Tom Brokaw said, we used to venerate the greatest generation. Now with baby boomers, I think you have the greediest generation. I'm part of it. So when you were saying what's the problem is the mindset. It's not just here in Harrisburg. Look at Social Security. Look at Medicare. Look at Medicaid. We're living on borrowed time. time and we're living on borrowed money. At some point, you got to pay the piper. That's just reality. And Barry is fond of using the analogy, we can't keep going to the mailbox and taking out the latest credit card with higher interest rates to pay off the other credit card that had lower interest rates. I think what's going to happen, and I hope I'm wrong, is, as I said, intergenerational warfare. Things that were once sacred are going to be cut. When young people become the people that govern, things that you thought would never be cut or addressed, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, are going to be cut, as will pensions.
Well,
and that's why I'm saying to people, I'm pleading with them, come to the table now where you can direct a solution that is not as draconian as what's going to happen down the road.
And at the PA Chamber of Commerce dinner last night, one thing they brought up was the fear that because there isn't civility in politics, young people are not going to get involved in public service. You look at issues like the pension issue, and it's not only about civility, it's about the complexity, and it's about just kind of the tangled web where people my age say, I'm not going anywhere near that because everything I have to offer, that's not going to be taken seriously because there's so much self-interest.
I think what you may have is the same problem we have now, is that, you know, the ability of people to walk across the aisle and to socialize and to bond and to be courageous enough to make a decision doesn't exist. And there's nothing that leads me to believe that younger people won't be the same. You basically have the collective IQ in the legislature of a marshmallow. So as you move forward,
you have a way of putting things.
Yeah. So what we need is integrity, character, and leadership. So I'm not saying that the young people don't have it. We sure as hell don't have it now. And everybody who's in the legislature is loath to lose their job, just like justices. They want to hang on, and they're not going to do anything that endangers their job or their livelihood.
Well, and that's what you and I talked about this earlier, Dennis, and it picks up what Eric said. We got to bring all the stakeholders together. And the media, in my mind, can do it. You got to invite them all. Have a big room. The PSEA, AFSCME, leadership in the House and the Senate, the governor's office, everybody who has a stake in this, to come in face to face, eyeball to eyeball. The Chamber of Commerce, Gene Barr and his group and so forth, come in and say, all right, what are you going to put on the table? You can't come in and say, I'm coming to defend my little piece of the pie or my big piece of the pie, whatever it might be. I'm here. We're going to work towards a solution. And if they don't show the names of the group and say they were invited but they didn't care to show and participate in this discussion. Problem is, a lot of big ones won't, because they'd rather use the answer to picnic to do their dirty work behind the scenes. And primarily what I call the lobbyists, who want to work quietly and protect my little piece of the pie, but I don't want my fingers on it, so I hire somebody to do that on my behalf. We can do this. I mean, the irony
I was going to
for
say,
me,
Dennis, you're going to need to get on that.
the irony
No
for me
pressure.
last week was I went to Representative Dan McNeil's funeral down in Whitehall. Mm-hmm. There was Republican and Democratic legislators. And I told my wife, I said, it was funny. All of them, Republicans and Democrats, were on the same aisle, same side of the aisle in the church. And they were sitting amongst each other in the pews. And I said it was a beautiful sight. Yeah. It's a shame someone had to die for that to happen.
Well,
that's what we need, some kind of, tell me what your solution is. Everybody can identify the problems. Tell me what your solution is.
But the flip side of that, too, is people coming together. Isn't that what also led to this problem in the first place? So we talk about how we want the parties to come together and accomplish something. Well, they did that in 2001. And isn't that why we're all here today?
They did conspire to do something that was in their self-interest, and they also conspired to do something that would help them get reelected because they got a lot of, political capital from this. And I look, I'd rather have it that the people get along and know one another. They know the kids. They vacation together. They eat together. I just think it leads to the opportunity and the potential to solve problems. At the end of the day, I think what we have now, and we use the term all the time, is not only gridlock, but almost systemic gridlock. That we're to the point where it's gotcha politics. Even if it's the right thing to do, people are unwilling to do it because it might wind up in somebody else benefiting, across the political aisle. I think we have to take the risk. Amanda, I think you're right. We have to gamble. We have to at least be able to talk to one another. And that's across society. We saw that in Charlottesville. We see it everywhere. As my goodness, we're the same country. We should be going after the same purpose. I mean, that's patriotic.
Well, and after Hurricanes Harvey and Irma, you didn't ask if you're Republican or Democrat when somebody's rescuing you in a
That's
boat
right.
and
Right.
helping you to clean out your house. And okay, 15 seconds each of you. Is there any reason for optimism in this entire quagmire that is the pension problem in Pennsylvania?
I don't have much optimism at all, Dennis. Somebody said, "When are you going to give this up?" I said, "Well, I'll wait till the next governor is sworn in to see if he throws me out." But I'm really want to hang around there to see. It's going to probably be close to $90 billion by the time the next governor's sworn in on January 2019. And I'm thinking, boy, we solve this problem. Fortunately or unfortunately, the clock goes up to $999 billion. So
What are you going to do after that?
Hopefully,
Yeah.
we don't test that. Eric.
Well, I'm always optimistic. I've been at it a while. I think you have to have faith, and it's basically you're looking for the opportunity when you basically have an intersection where you have leadership and timing collide. We don't have it now, and I think for people out there, what they should be doing is basically forcing their representatives to have regular meetings and ask them, how are they going to solve it? I think it has to be a grassroots upheaval because it's not going to come from the legislature or the governor. We're both collectively inert.
And the key to that grassroots upheaval is people paying attention that when some story about pensions comes on, you don't change the channel and your eyes glaze over. You need to
Right.
engage because it does affect everybody.
And it bleeds into other issues too. And thinking of bringing that up, when we were all going to vote on the retirement age for judges, what does that do to pensions if we're going to raise it? How do
Jacks
we
it up.
Exactly. And I think that it's maybe not second nature to think that way, but there is a link where if you don't know who your state lawmakers are, you can look them up. We're going to put a link to it in our show notes, and it has their contact information. So if you do want to call someone up, that's
Let them
probably
know,
the
'cause
best
they do
place to
listen.
start.
Actually, they do listen.
If you
And
call,
we
there,
have
pay
emails
attention.
And you have everything you can want. You can sit down and just send them an email.
Yeah.
It's
So we'll
so
make that
easy
real
to
easy
But
for
most
contact
you.
your
important is the
legislator.
resolute commitment from WHTM to bring all the stakeholders together. And
We need to work on that. It's okay. Challenge accepted. We'll get back to you. Barry Shutt and Eric Epstein, thank you both
Sure.
so much for sharing your time today.
Now it's time for a word from you, your comments, suggestions, and questions you sent in this week. Now that we figured out that we have the ability to play audio recordings you send us, we're having a lot of fun with that. So please send them our way to the investigators, THE investigators at abc27.com. Friend of the podcast, Jake sent one in. Let's play what he had to say.
This is Jake Miller from Hampton Township. I just wanted to share that any high school senior or parent of one who has not heard the podcast episode on increasing college costs definitely needs to give it a listen, both on a personal level and on a macro scale. I think Flora and the team hit it out of the park. So if you're going to college, listen up.
Thanks, Jake.
Very nice.
Yeah. So it's so nice to be able to hear the sound of people's voices and
Yes.
the tone and everything like that. So please send us in your audio clips. That was a really fun podcast. I don't think you were there for that one, Dennis.
he liked the one that I didn't participate in.
But we really delved into why the cost of college is going up and things you can do if you're a parent or if you're a student kind of in that situation. So we'll post a link to that in our show notes as well. We also got an email about the podcast episode we did about Confederate monuments.
Okay.
And whether they are preserving history or preserving prejudice. So this person said, I am no fan of war monuments. I find the glorification of state violence abhorrent. Monuments do not teach history in any meaningful, contextual manner. Nuance is lost with the casting of human participants into metal. This discussion is a divide and conquer strategy. The increasing media attention on the racial divide in this country is an intentional distraction from the more acute problem of economic imbalance. Of course, race is an integral aspect of those economic issues, but it is not the fundamental problem. And there's more to that email, but I don't know that we have time to get into
it's
that.
interesting. Stan Lawson, former head of the NAACP here in this area, said to me, we're talking. We had a conversation about the monuments. He said the issue isn't the monuments; it's factories that have closed and it's people that otherwise had jobs back in the day that don't now. It's more of an economic. He made the same point that this is more about economics and people frustrated at their loss of opportunities. What they perceive as that.
Yeah. So we love your feedback. Send it to us. It makes a big difference. And a lot of times the questions you ask and the comments you make, it helps us figure out what other episodes we should do and what we should focus on.
Well, if you'd like to check out the links to the stories, articles, and videos we discussed, you can find them on our show notes on our website, abc27.com. To get On Deadline delivered directly to your phone, tablet, or computer each week, subscribe in iTunes or Google Play Music. Please take a few minutes to leave us a review in iTunes. We do read them, and your thoughts help us figure out what we're doing well and what we can improve upon. If you have any news tips for the ABC 27 investigators or any questions, topics you'd like us to discuss during our weekly podcast, please send us a message on the ABC 27 Investigators Facebook page. Thank you to Eric Semmel for producing today's podcast and Jason Dietz for composing and recording the music. It is time for us to go because we're on deadline.